the sound of small shoes echoing through the marble corridors of Hartwell Industries had become as familiar as the morning coffee brewing in the executive suite. But today, something was different. CEO Margaret Hartwell's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched from her corner office, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of her mahogany desk until her knuckles turned white. There, in the hallway below, was her 8-year-old son Daniel, and he wasn't alone. Danny sat cross-legged on the cold floor beside Miguel Santos, the night janitor who'd worked these halls for over 15 years. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Her son in his private school uniform, pressed and pristine, next to a man whose weathered hands bore the calluses of countless nights spent cleaning offices while the city slept. What froze Margaret's blood wasn't just seeing them together, it was the way Danny looked at Miguel, with the kind of pure trust and joy she hadn't seen in her son's eyes for months. The elevator couldn't move fast enough. Margaret's heels clicked like a metronome against the polished floors as she strode toward them, her executive presence commanding attention from every employee who happened to witness her rare descent from the 40th floor. She built an empire worth billions, commanded boardrooms filled with powerful men, and negotiated deals that shaped industries. Yet nothing had prepared her for the protective fury that surged through her as she approached what she perceived as a threat to her child. "Excuse me." Margaret's voice cut through their conversation like a blade. Both Danny and Miguel looked up, the boy's face lighting up while the janitor's expression immediately shifted to one of respectful wariness. "You're not supposed to be near my son," she warned, her tone carrying all the authority of her position. "I need you to step away from him now." Danny's smile vanished. "Mom," Miguel was just "Danny, go to my office." Immediately, Margaret's eyes never left Miguel, who had slowly risen to his feet, his hands visible and non-threatening. The janitor was smaller than she'd expected up close, his face lined with exhaustion but his eyes remarkably gentle. Still, she'd heard too many stories, seen too many news reports. She couldn't take any chances with her son's safety. "Mom, I understand your concern," Miguel began, his English careful and respectful despite the slight accent that colored his words. "But before you call security, there's something you should know." Margaret's phone was already in her hand, security on speed dial. "There's nothing you could possibly say that would Your son saved my daughter's life." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow, stopping her finger just before it touched the call button. Miguel's voice hadn't risen above a respectful tone, but there was something in those 6 simple words that made her pause. Danny, who had started walking toward the elevators, turned back with tears beginning to well in his young eyes. "3 weeks ago," Miguel continued, his voice steady despite the obvious emotion behind it, "my daughter Elena was having an asthma attack in the parking garage downstairs. She's 10, just 2 years older than Danny here. She comes with me sometimes when my wife works late shifts at the hospital as she's a nurse. You see, we couldn't afford childcare, and Elena likes to do her homework while I clean." Margaret felt her certainty beginning to crack, but she held Miguel's gaze, waiting for him to continue. "That night, Elena's inhaler was empty. I'd forgotten to check it, forgotten to get it refilled." Miguel's voice broke slightly. "She couldn't breathe, Mrs. Hartwell. She was turning blue, and I was panicking, screaming for help in the empty garage. That's when your son appeared." Danny had stopped crying, but his small voice carried clearly in the marble hallway. "I heard shouting when I was waiting for you to finish your meeting. I knew someone needed help." "Your 8-year-old son didn't hesitate," Miguel said, his eyes now bright with unshed tears. "He ran to the security desk, demanded they call 911, and then came back to us. He sat with Elena, held her hand, and told her jokes while we waited for the paramedics. But that's not even the most incredible part. Margaret's phone had long since been forgotten, now hanging loosely at her side. Around them, the usual bustle of the office had quieted as employees sensed the gravity of the moment unfolding. Danny remembered seeing Elena's inhaler was the same brand his classmate uses. He knew from school safety lessons that she needed a rescue inhaler immediately, so he did something that probably saved her life. Miguel looked directly at Danny with a gratitude so profound it was almost tangible. He ran all the way up to the 40th floor of 40 flights of stairs because he said the elevator would take too long. Burst into your meeting, and demanded you call your assistant to find out which pharmacy was still open. The memory hit Margaret like a tsunami. 3 weeks ago, Danny had indeed interrupted her merger meeting with Tokyo investors, something so unprecedented and shocking that she'd been furious. He'd been breathless, desperate, talking about some girl who needed medicine. She'd been mortified in front of her international partners, had quickly sent her assistant to handle whatever crisis Danny had imagined, and then spent the rest of the evening lecturing him about appropriate behavior and not interrupting important business. She'd never asked what happened after that, never followed up on why her assistant had indeed found an all-night pharmacy and had someone deliver an emergency inhaler to the building. She'd assumed it was some minor playground drama blown out of proportion by a child's imagination. The paramedics said if Elena had waited even 10 more minutes for help, she might not have made it. Miguel continued. Your son didn't just call for help, he took action, he problem solved, and he refused to give up until he found a solution. He probably saved my daughter's life. Margaret's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. The man she'd seen as a potential threat, whose presence near her son had triggered every protective instinct she possessed, was instead expressing gratitude for something she hadn't even known had happened. More devastating still was the realization that her son, her quiet, sometimes withdrawn son, had displayed more leadership, compassion, and quick thinking than she'd seen from executives with decades of experience. Since that night, Miguel said softly, Elena has been asking to meet the boy who saved her. So when Danny saw me in the hallway today and remembered me from the garage, I was finally able to thank him properly. We were just talking about his school, his interests. Elena wants to write him a thank you letter. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw not the child she needed to protect from the world, but a young person who had already shown he was capable of protecting others. The shame that washed over her was so intense she felt physically ill. I owe you an apology, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. Both of you. I made assumptions based on. She paused, forcing herself to confront the ugly truth. Based on prejudice, based on fear that had nothing to do with who you actually are. Miguel's smile was gentle, understanding. You were protecting your son. I'm a father too. I understand that instinct. But Danny, with the brutal honesty that only children possess, wasn't ready to let it go so easily. Mom, you always tell me to judge people by their character, not by what they look like or what job they have. But you didn't do that just now. The truth of his words cut deeper than any business rival's criticism ever had. Margaret had spent Danny's entire life teaching him values she'd apparently failed to live up to herself when it mattered most. You're absolutely right, Margaret admitted, kneeling down to Danny's eye level. "I failed to practice what I've preached to you. I let fear and assumptions guide my actions instead of giving Mr. Santos the respect and benefit of the doubt he deserved." She looked up at Miguel. "The respect you had already earned through your kindness to my son." Over the following weeks, Margaret made it her personal mission to truly understand the people who kept her company running after hours. She learned that Miguel had been working nights for 15 years to support his family while studying for his accounting degree during the dire a degree he was just 6 months from completing. She discovered that Elena was an honor student who dreamed of becoming a doctor like the ones who had saved her life that night. The friendship that developed between Danny and Elena became a bridge between two worlds that should never have been separated in the first place. Margaret began offering college scholarships to the children of her night staff, implementing better healthcare benefits, and creating pathways for advancement that recognize talent and dedication regardless of someone's starting position. But perhaps the most profound change was in how she saw her own son. Danny's quiet confidence, his natural empathy, and his instinct to help others weren't weaknesses that needed protection, they were strengths that would serve him well as he grew into the kind of leader the world desperately needed. 6 months later, when Miguel graduated with his accounting degree and accepted a position in Margaret's financial department, he brought Elena to the company party. As Margaret watched her son and Elena laughing together, sharing stories about their schools and dreams for the future, she realized that the moment in the hallway had taught her something no business school or boardroom experience ever could. True leadership isn't about commanding from above, but about recognizing the extraordinary humanity that exists at every level of our shared experience. The janitor hadn't just saved her from making a terrible mistake that day, he'd shown her that the most important lessons often come from the people we least expect to be our teachers.